a watch on each and every person who is inside the prison. Now, who is in the central watchtower, what goes on is something we'll talk about later. But this idea is extremely important to know that everybody is inside the prison. We can't see other prisoners. For example, if we are inside it, we cannot see each other because of the circular structure. But the person who is at the central watchtower is able to look at each and every person and is able to see what they are doing. So with that established in our minds, that this analogy between, let's say, panopticon prison and what we do on social media, we'll delve deeper into identity. Now, obviously, identity and social media, once again, as I said, there is so much to talk about. But for now, I'll just take up a couple of points, 4 to 5 points as far as identity is concerned, and then we'll move ahead. Now, the first thing that comes to our mind when we think of social media is anonymity, or the fact or the idea of being anonymous. Now, very often we see people saying that, oh, you are just a nameless troll, you are just a faceless hater. What we mean by that essentially is that people feel a sense of anonymity on social media. We feel that nobody sees us, nobody knows who we are. That is the kind of idea that we function with when we are on social media. Let's say we take up a fake username, a fake profile picture, and so on. However, on a closer look, we do realize that this anonymity is not real. It is a myth, or rather, it is an illusion that we believe. We believe that we are anonymous, but that may not always be the case. So one of the first things that comes under illusion of anonymity, in my view, would be the concept of partial anonymity. Now, once again, going back to the panopticon prison, basically what I'm trying to say is that all of us voluntarily sign up, we decide to enroll on a particular platform, and we willingly decide to go and sit inside one of these cells. Then we believe that, oh, nobody is able to see me because I'm covered from all sides. Nobody can see me. If we take a fake username, other users definitely can't see us. They don't know who we are, just like in the panopticon. But there is somebody sitting in the central watchtower, which is here, who knows us, who knows exactly who we are. And this obviously is the tech company. It could be Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, any of it. When we register, we are required to give our cell phone number, email address, a few other details, probably birth date. Most importantly, whether we realize it or not, we are also giving our IP address to these tech companies. So even if we believe that we are anonymous on social media, it is partial because the person who is in power, which is the tech company for the platform, they know who we are, and every activity that we do can be traced back to us. So one of the aspects of this is just partial anonymity. The second would be constant surveillance. Again, going back to the image of the panopticon, the person in the central watchtower constantly keeps a watch on us, looking at what we do, what we don't do. Now, in the age of social media, it involves things like our location. Even if we turn our location off, there is a very high possibility that we are still being monitored. Then location or the apps that we install, all of this is actually looked at. The kind of shopping that we do online, what we added in our carts, what we removed from our carts, all of it is constantly observed. As you know, we say Big Brother is watching. This is exactly what the Big Brother has been doing, and even right now as we are speaking, may be doing. If you think about it, if you don't visit a particular platform for, let's say, 2 months, 3 months, you will start receiving messages from them saying, we missed you, or this is what you missed. So the idea is that even if you do not visit the platform, you are still being surveilled. Again, the question of anonymity definitely tells us that maybe we are not as anonymous as we think ourselves to be on social media. Now, when we are talking about anonymity, there is also another side to anonymity, which is seen very commonly, very frequently on all social media platforms, which is the no consequence belief. Now, because we think that we are anonymous, we feel that whatever action we do will have no consequence because we can never be identified. Our actions can never be traced back to us, which is why people often do things on social media or say things on social media which they would not have if their identity was known. So this in a way kind of I don't want to say forces, but leads people to do things which they would not have done otherwise. And directly connected to this no consequence belief is the idea of shedding or throwing away social morality. Now, I do not mean to say that we must follow all social conventions, but our civilization has evolved over 2000, 3000 years. After trial and error, what is correct, what is wrong, what is harmful, we have evolved. And now we have come up with a set of a few rules, or let's say a few conventions that is expected to be followed. But because I feel that I'm anonymous, I don't feel the need to respect people. I can go on and mock somebody's language, mock their skin color, mock their religious beliefs, and so on. And I do it without any fear because I believe I'm anonymous. So, in a way, this idea of anonymity, one is that it is an illusion. And second, although it is an illusion, people believe that it's real and they indulge in a few activities which ideally nobody should indulge in. Now, the next part about illusion of anonymity, or rather what we spoke about, the shedding of social morality, directly leads us to the next idea, which is mob mentality. Now, if we think about mob mentality here, uh, a lot of tech experts and a lot of psychologists also believe that when we are on social media, we are in a constant state of mob mentality. Now, there are few basic defining characteristics of mob mentality. One is lack of rational thinking. When we are on social media and somebody posts something, we don't really bother to find out whether that is factual, whether that is true, is there data to support it, and so on. We just believe whatever comes before us, and logic definitely takes a backseat. The second, again, would be heightened emotional response. Anytime we see something that doesn't fit with our worldview, we immediately start typing. We become typing warriors. Again, our emotions are heightened. And the third and the most, let's say, dangerous part is ignoring the reality or the surroundings around us. So when we are on social media, we completely forget about the area that we are in, what we are doing, and so on. Similarly, as what a person would do if they were in the state of mob mentality. So this mob mentality is quite new as compared to other regimes where there was some sort of a control on people's heightened emotional responses. But here we do not really find any such control, or let's say any such check which is exercised by the platform. Now, when we are talking about a mob or a group, there is a very strong connection between a group identity and the loss of individual identity. On social media, we are always a part of some group. It could be simply as I like X actor better than Y actor. I'm going to find 50 other people who believe that X is better than Y. So something as simple as what actor I like, what brand of coffee I like, actually creates group identity. And this is not as harmless as it looks. Right now, we are in the initial stages where it's just, oh, I like this, and then you also like this. For example, we have BTS Army. That is nothing but a group identity where we stop thinking as individuals and start thinking as a group. The reason why social media is very different from the previous regimes is because back in the day, we could get involved in probably just one or two mobs because it required physical involvement. You had to go to that place and get involved. But today that is not the case. You have a cell phone. You can be a part of as many groups as you want, as many mobs as you want. It could be, as I said, from actors, from what country is better, how that country is not good, how this language is not good. It could be anything and everything under the sky can be found in a mob. Now, because we are talking about anything and everything, it takes us to the next idea, which is the idea of homophily. Now, homophily is nothing but simply birds of same feather flock together. We always like to associate with people who have similar viewpoints, similar likes, similar dislikes, and so on. The problem with social media is that or rather, let's say, I wouldn't call it a problem, but the interesting thing about social media is that you could be upset about anything. You could have a complaint about literally anything in the world, and you are always going to find 5 or 10 other people who have the exact same complaints, who have the exact same grievances. And this connection of grievances that, oh, I also don't have it, you are also oppressed, they are also oppressed, whatever it is, it actually creates a sense of shared struggle. Then we once again start thinking as a group. We don't really bother about fact, rational logic, but we just have this inherent human tendency, the need to belong. Once we find that shared struggle, we become a part of it, whether we agree with it or not. There again, it's almost like our conscience again or logic takes a backseat. This is a very interesting quote which talks about the kind of effects that social media has. Although right now it is limited only to social media, but if polarization was the beginning of social media, then civil war, strife, and rioting are its natural extensions. The danger of mob mentality is not that we stop thinking rationally, but the bigger danger is that whatever happens on social media is going to be translated into reality sometime or the other. It is never going to remain only on social media, it comes out in reality. And we have seen so many such instances. One of the most recent ones being the violence which took place in Bengaluru in 2020, where somebody posted something offensive on Facebook and it translated into a large scale riot in some part of the city. So this is the danger of mob mentality as far as social media is concerned. Now, since we have been talking about identifying with a particular group or feeling a sense of shared struggle, a very important part of social media is identification. Now, within identification, again, there could be different things that we could talk about, how they identify us, the fingerprinting, the face recognition, and so on. Here, we'll just take a look or a brief look at identification. Now, one of the first things that comes to my mind when we talk about identification would be the concept of a control society, which was propounded by the French critic Gilles Deleuze in 1992, definitely a visionary. So what he said was that in the control society, which is dominated by technology, and obviously by technology, we mean tech companies, there is no physical confinement. So back in the day, if somebody had to brainwash us, if somebody had to teach us something, they actually had to put us in 4 walls to make sure that we don't run away and then continue with whatever they were doing. That is not the case today. In the control society, we are free to do whatever we want, but we are always being surveilled. We are not in the 1984 Orwellian kind of society where we are completely locked in a room, but we are still being surveilled. That is one part of identification. If we are constantly being observed and surveilled, obviously we can be identified very easily because the people know exactly who we are and exactly what we are doing. The second aspect of the control society is that unlike the previous regimes, which silenced freedom of speech, which did not let people move, which did not allow people to talk to each other, the control society actually encourages people when they are expressing themselves, when they are moving around in the country, when they interact with each other, all of that is actually encouraged by the control society. Now, it may seem very convenient to say that, oh, they do it because they support freedom of speech and expression or they support freedom. But, we know that definitely tech companies they don't care about our freedom of speech and expression. So the idea here is the more we express, the more we are exposing ourselves, the more we are revealing about ourselves. For example, if I buy a new car and I post pictures of it, I think that, oh, I have the freedom to tell the world that I bought a new car. But the tech company or the algorithms which run Facebook or Twitter actually look at it in a very different way. They look at it as, okay, this person bought this brand of car, which means that this must be their economic strata and so on. So the idea is that the more we express, we are also exposing ourselves continuously to the tech companies and the algorithms that they have created. So this brings us to a very important question. In this situation then, what is our real identity? Now, we always say that I am this, I am that. We talk about our identity in these terms. But in today's times, it is clear that that is not our real identity. In fact, our identity is expressed through things like what brand of car we drive, what brand of phone we use, where we had lunch, whom we met, where we went for vacation, and so on. So all these simple things or these seemingly harmless things are actually helping the algorithms create an identity for us. So it's a very complex process. Then what is our real identity here? The one that we believe that I am this, I am that, or is it something that the algorithms have created for us? So here identification becomes a very important tool to exercise control over us. The very important question once again here is, why are these tech companies or why are the algorithms doing all of this? The purpose of identification is not at all very harmful. It's not like a conspiracy theory. The purpose is very simple. It is very clear. The purpose is to identify our habits, identify our trends, and then give us customized content. Give us customized content so that we remain hooked onto the platform. So we start spending more and more time. The more time we spend, the more we are expressing about ourselves. And the more time we spend, we are giving out more data, which means more ads, which means more revenue for the company. So at this stage, the purpose doesn't really seem very harmful because it's simply for money or for their revenue. But the question is that what it could be used for, or anything that is actually harmless can always be exploited by someone for their benefit. Here, that is the same idea. Now, whether we are being identified to push a particular product saying that, oh, you should use this brand of toothpaste, or is it for promoting a particular politician saying that you should vote for this person and not for that person? This is where the whole issue of Cambridge Analytica comes into being. Now, here I'm talking about the pre-2016 era, before Donald Trump was actually elected. Cambridge Analytica actually bought a lot of data from Facebook about their users. Now, here we won't talk about that was lawful, unlawful, legal, illegal. We'll keep that aside for now. But they bought a lot of data from Facebook and they found out two things. Americans who actually bought American-made cars, specifically from the brand Ford, were extremely likely to vote for Trump, irrespective of their state, their skin color, or anything else. If they bought Ford cars, then they were very likely to vote for Trump. So if you think about it, just what brand of car we buy, if that can actually push us to vote for a particular person, that is a very strange phenomenon that we have not been used to in the previous regimes or in the previous times. And the technological advancement, while we praise it, it's also important to remember that there could be certain consequences which we had not really foreseen before. Another thing that Analytica found out was that stay-at-home mothers were extremely likely to vote for Trump, as opposed to working women who believed that the Trump regime would take away their rights. So again, what we do, what our profession is, how we spend our time, all of these things can get us to actually vote for someone. Now here, I'm not saying that the 2016 elections were because of Cambridge Analytica or despite. I'm not making any such statements. But the simple thing here is that it deserves a thought from us as to where this is going. So this is something that I think, as far as identification is concerned, is very important. Now, identification doesn't just end at, okay, this person likes this, show them ads of this product. It actually goes beyond that, and it brings us to the idea of digital eugenics. Now, basically, eugenics was a very flawed process or a very flawed idea, which said that if there is a dog or any animal for that matter, we have to remove the undesirable traits or the unwanted elements from the species and then breed the dog or the animal so that the next generation is going to be just pure breed, and it is not going to have anything undesirable. Unfortunately, this idea of eugenics was also used for humans, and in fact, until 1905, in the state of California, African Americans, Asians, physically handicapped, and mentally ill people were not allowed to have children because that would mean passing on, quote unquote, undesirable traits to the next generation. This is as far as eugenics goes. We know about this, we have heard about this. But now comes the important part about digital eugenics, which is, are platforms or social media practicing something like eugenics? And if they are, then how are they doing it? Now, once again, the idea of eugenics remains the same. The process, however, is different. It is not about letting someone have children and not. Now it is about censoring some things which are undesirable or unwanted or inconvenient for the platforms. So it could be censoring something that questions the platforms, censoring something that asks about the funding for the platform, censoring why they are going back on their own policies, asking them about what is being done with data. It could be anything. The most recent example of this would be the lab leak theory. When it came out in 2020, it was not just opinion pieces and some people saying that, oh, it must be China. Scientific journals, scientists had published their work saying that it may be a lab leak, but all of these things were censored. They were not allowed to exist anywhere on the platform. And if people repeatedly posted the same thing about lab leak, they were in fact suspended and their accounts were permanently deleted. So here what we get to see is that this kind of eugenics removes whatever is inconvenient for the platform, so that whatever remains on the platform is all hunky-dory, it is all good, it is all desirable. The only problem with digital eugenics is the ever-changing notions of undesirable. With traditional eugenics, it was based purely on genetic. It was against a particular race, a particular ethnicity, a particular body type, any of that. So it was a very permanent definition of undesirable. But that is not the case with digital eugenics, because it is against a particular idea which goes against, let's say, the interests of social media. Now, a very relevant, or let's say a very recent example of this would be what happened in the month of May. We all know how social media platforms have a very strong policy against anti-Semitism, so much so that if you even type the word Nazi and you post it, your account is immediately flagged. That is the kind of policies that they used to have until the month of May. After the Israel-Palestine conflict broke out, anti-Semitism was rampant on social media to the point where hashtags like "I wish Hitler were alive" were not just allowed, but in fact they were trending across social media platforms. So it's very difficult to understand that something that was undesirable until yesterday suddenly becomes desirable today and may become undesirable tomorrow once again. Which is why digital eugenics is very difficult to circumvent or very difficult to fight against, because we don't know what is going to be desirable and undesirable. So that is as far as digital eugenics goes. Now I come to the very last aspect of identity, which I'm going to be talking about. Again, as I said, there are multiple aspects. Here I have just chosen 5 to talk about. The next, and something that we are experiencing every single day, something that we see every single day, is the idea of hyper-reality. Now, hyper-reality is basically our inability to differentiate between reality and narrative. And we talk about it every single time. Every single time people come and say that, oh, this is just a narrative. This is WhatsApp University. This is this, this is that. But the point is that these narratives are becoming popular, and it is a very dangerous phenomenon because we cannot differentiate between reality and what is not really real. So this is what we call hyper-reality. The reason why hyper-reality is so prevalent is because of the idea of bombarding. We have all heard the quote, if you repeat a lie 1,000 times, it becomes the truth. And that is exactly what is being done with these narratives. These narratives are repeatedly thrown at us. We are bombarded with them to the point where we feel that, okay, this may be the reality. If agar sab log kar rahe to kuch hoga, as Farhan Akhtar had said. So that is the same idea with bombarding, that narratives actually start seeming more real to us, to the point where we start doubting our own self experience. Our experience in our life tells us one thing, but the narrative, if it says something else, we start doubting our own experience because it doesn't match the narrative that everybody is talking about. If there are 50,000 people talking about it, then my experience must be wrong because 50,000 people are talking about it. That is exactly how hyper reality functions. The best example for this would be the way college life is presented in movies. Now, in movies, the college life is all about going there, singing, dancing, throwing things around and all kinds of nonsense. But we know that our real life tells us that that is not how college life is. It's not at all like that. But still, because it is thrown at us through multiple movies, multiple times, we start believing that aisa bhi hota hoga. It may be real. We don't know. So this is where doubting self-experience comes in. In this case, what happens to our identity is something that is, it deserves a thought. Our identity doesn't fall from the sky. Through our interactions with people, through our interactions with the world around, through our experiences, we develop our own identity. But now, if our identity itself is not our own, it is not based on our experiences, but it is based on a particular narrative which may not be true, then our identity, the question is it our real identity? Is that identity who we are, or is it something that is manipulated? We don't have an answer to it, but certainly we need to think about it. Now, a very simple example of this would be the picture here. Our own experience tells us from times immemorial that 2 plus 2 is 4. But if there are 50 people saying that no, 2 plus 2 is 7, there comes a point in our life where we start believing that maybe 2 plus 2 could be 7. We don't know. This is exactly the problem with hyper reality. And it's not a new phenomenon. We have all heard about Hitler's propaganda minister Goebbels and how he came up with a brilliant system to actually convince people of a reality which is not really existing. But the problem with social media is the speed at which it throws things at us. We don't have to receive a pamphlet anymore. We don't have to do any of that. We don't have to attend meetings. The moment we are connected to the internet, we are in the world of hyper reality. Now, we spoke about identity for quite a bit, but the important question here would be, when citizens start doubting their own experiences, what happens to democracy? We vote based on our experience. If I feel that, oh, nobody repaired the roads, I have no water, no electricity, I'm not going to vote for the same person next time because that is my experience. But if I feel that no, maybe my experience is not correct, if 50,000 other people have a good opinion, then maybe the person may be good. And this is where democracy actually starts crumbling bit by bit, because the assumption of democracy is that people are in their right minds and people are going to vote based on their experience, based on what they feel about a particular person. This is where we actually enter into this very complex arena of democracy, where once again there is so much to speak about, but we limit ourselves to a couple of points or a couple of aspects within the idea of democracy in social media. Democracy in the age of social media is something that we have been talking about. People have been talking about it, the dangers and so on. But it's important to actually look at democracy and social media as two different things. What I mean by this is that democracy and the digital media, social media, technological media, whatever we want to call it, they are actually products of two different time periods or two different eras. So naturally, there is going to be an inherent difference between the two. If we look at democracy, it came, or rather, let's say it evolved and it reached its current stage at a time of nation states where we had strong geographical borders. We had hierarchies. This is on top. This comes second. This comes third, and so on. And also industrialized economies. So it is a product of a different time period. But digital media, on the other hand, is non-geographical. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. It doesn't have any boundaries as such. It is decentralized. There isn't one central authority. All of us seem to have equal share of power. So in a way, it is decentralized. It is data driven. It is not driven by experiences or what people feel, will of the people. No, it is data driven. And most importantly, it is subject to exponential growth. So a democratic country like India, tomorrow if it decides I'll start growing, it can't really occupy the entire of Asia and say that now this is my border. We can't do that in a democracy. But that is always possible on social media because it tries to gain more and more users across the world. In fact, Jamie Bartlett, who is a tech expert and a journalist, he believes that now Facebook and Twitter have reached the point where there are no new users. No, out of the 7 billion people, they have consumed all 7 billion people, and now in fact they do not have any more humans who are going to be their users. So again, exponential growth. Now, this is something that we have heard very often, that democracy is the second best form of governance. The first is yet to be discovered. Now, this quote, although it seems funny, but the problem is that there is a chance that some people are believing that the first form of governance has been found. What I mean by this is that if we look at Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, WhatsApp, so on, all of them have started talking about freedom of speech and expression, promoting equality, equity, justice, giving representation, all of which are actually the role of the state in a democratic setup. So these people have started hijacking, or these people have started taking on things that are actually supposed to be done by the democracy. Secondly, they are not just somebody who says that I'll do this, we'll do that, but they also have the power to actually implement whatever they are saying. They have tremendous power because, as I said, they have covered almost the entire world. So they have a lot of power to implement whatever they say. So there is a shift from the previous attitude of the companies where they were just profit driven and they cared only about money. Now there is a shift to the point where they believe that their system of, or let's say the technical system, can actually be an alternative to democracy. Now, whether this is true or not, we'll talk about it. But they have started believing that the first form is, where the tech companies are in power and they are going to do the best for the world. Now, this is just a very interesting quote that I found by John Perry Barlow. He was a singer, but apart from that, he signed something called Declaration of Independence of the Cyberspace. So he strongly believed, again back in 2004 and 5, that once technology takes over, everything will be equal. Everybody will have opportunity. Everybody will have a chance to better their lives and so on. But the point is that, as he says himself, that the governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. Again, in a democratic system only, you and I actually go out and vote, and we give our consent to whoever comes to power, which is actually a very good process because we have control over who comes in power. But the tech companies, if you think about it, we have zero say in their decision making. They come up with a policy, we just say, okay, fine, because we have nothing else to do. We can't do anything else. Whom they hire, whom they fire, where they open their, something new, they open up a different kind of, setup in a new country. We have zero say in it. But nonetheless, as times are changing, as I said, because they are products of a different era, obviously they are going to be in conflict with each other. But since tech companies have started presenting themselves as a good alternative to democracy, we are still in the stages where they have started believing. We are not in the stage where everybody else also believes the same. But still, it's important to actually examine the tech system using the same parameters which are applied for democracy to actually see whether it could be a good alternative or not. So we'll just look at a few parameters very quickly. One of the first ones, obviously, is opinions and the will of the people. Now it's I mean, everybody, no need to repeat it, but it's known that democracy values individual opinion and it is founded on the will of the people. So the actual power lies in the people in democracy. But if we talk about the tech system here, firstly, the will of the people doesn't matter. We have zero say in their policy making or what they do. So will of the people not important. And secondly, as we spoke about in hyper reality, the opinions that we have are actually molded that, we do not really have a chance to put forth our true opinions. They are always molded, by bombarding us with a particular narrative, and they are molded to fit the interests of the tech company. So on that parameter, definitely tech doesn't really work as well as democracy does. The next one, once again, directly connected to opinions and will of the people, is the question of dissent. In a democracy, say you voted in 2019, you are against this particular government in 2019, you constantly express dissent, you constantly talk about how bad the government is. But in 2024, you are still going to have the right to put your vote. That is not the case with tech. The moment you start dissenting against the tech, the moment you start opposing the tech, one is that we will be censored. Second, we will be suspended for a few hours or a few days. Third, we will be pushed out of the platform. So dissent, or actually engaging with people who are dissenting, talking to them, arriving at a solution, none of that is done in tech. It's just brutal crushing of dissent. You can dissent against everybody else on tech, but you can't dissent against the tech company itself. Third, again, directly connected to dissent is redressal mechanism. Democracy has evolved for over 2000 years and we have reached here today. We have the police system, we have courts, we have panchayats and all kinds of setups to actually express our grievances and say that this is what happened to me. And we also have the scope of getting compensation for whatever we lost in a democracy. Now let's talk about the tech for a bit here. Let's say I am unfairly treated for something and I write to them and I say that please restore my account or please, do not remove my post, something like that. The thing is, they are not answerable to me. They don't have to restore my account. They do not have to conduct a fair trial. They have no reason to give me a chance to tell my side of the story. None of it is important. They are in power. They will decide what is correct. They will decide what is to be done. So there is, let's say there is a redressal mechanism in tech, but it's not a fair one. It is always going to vindicate them. As Jamaica Kincaid, the Caribbean author, she says that, the oppressor's judiciary is always going to vindicate them. And this is exactly what we see even in the case of tech. And the last part, which is probably one of the most dangerous aspects of tech being as an alternative to democracy. So in normal situation in democracy, the state is responsible for law and order. It will come up with different rules, different provisions to ensure that citizens are safe and law and order prevails. We had spoken about how whatever happens on social media is always translated into reality. But what we see is that the tech is not concerned with what happens in reality. So even if a Facebook post actually led to a large scale riot in a particular city, Facebook is never going to take responsibility for the riot. After all, it is the state which has to take the responsibility for whatever happened. So when we actually look at these few parameters, what we see is that one, obviously, tech fares extremely badly on all these parameters. But second, the attitude of the tech companies or the tech system, the technological, let's say, groups and systems actually remind us of medieval Europe, say 15th or 16th century, when there were nobles, landlords, or closer at home, we had zamindars who probably owned all the land that was there. They owned probably almost all the money that was there. The rest were just peasants and landless laborers who were working on the farms. These nobles and aristocrats had no responsibility. They did not care about anything else. And most importantly, the nobles or the feudal lords also had a control over the king. So in a way, if we think about the tech system, it is not so much egalitarian or something that is actually liberal and something that is actually going to help people better their lives, but it seems more like techno-feudalism. And whether we want that instead of democracy is actually a very subjective decision. But as far as the parameters are concerned, techno-feudalism definitely does not fare well on any of it. So here, if we look at the way tech actually functions, what we see is that it practices something which the Soviets used to call mind harvesting. It begins by taking control of your screen, what you see on screen, what you should not see on screen, so on. Second, it takes control of your time. We always say that, oh, I was just watching one YouTube video and then now it is 7 hours. I don't know where time went. That is exactly how they actually take control of our time, by showing us things that we will want to watch. And the last step of the process is taking control of the mind. And wherever we have the mind, wherever we have somebody taking control of the mind, supremacy starts, supremacy comes in. But before we actually go into supremacy, although supremacy is important for us, but before we go into that, we'll just quickly talk about social media and chaos. Now, the important thing here is that the media companies, they do not subscribe to one ideology. Although at times, we say that, oh, this is left leaning, oh, that is right leaning, and so on. But the reality is they do not subscribe to one ideology because they cannot afford to subscribe to one ideology. What I mean by that is that disruptions in social life, disruptions in our daily life are important for platforms. Now, if there is any kind of disruption, I feel frustrated, I feel angry, I feel some type of way. So when I feel something, I feel the need to express myself, to vent out my anger and frustration. And here these platforms come in quickly and tell us, this is a free platform, why don't you vent out here? So the more there are disruptions, the more people are going to express, more people are going to talk, and the more users they have, the more data they have, and the more money they make. So one is disruptions are important. Second, conflict and strife are actually amplified by platforms. Now, once again, as I said, if there is a conflict, or to take a very simple example, anytime there is a fight between two people on the street, a very minor accident, two people are fighting on the street, 15 people will surround them and see what is happening. That is the human tendency, that wherever there is conflict, we are drawn towards it. So the reason why Big Boss is so popular is also the reason why conflict and strife is amplified by platforms. More the conflict, we are going to go on Facebook and watch what people are doing, how name calling goes on, how the fan army of one celebrity abuses the other, and so on. So conflict and strife is very important for the platforms. This also explains why during the Israel-Palestine conflict in the month of May, anti-Semitism was not punished, it was not censored, because it actually created conflict. More people actually came in to see how can people say this, just to see that people actually were joining the platforms. So that is one aspect of it. The last part is that any rift in society, it could be a very minor rift as well, is important for them. It is a part of their business model, which is why wherever you, or let's say wherever we see any kind of conflict, we are always going to find these platforms tom-tomming around the whole scene. To give you a very simple example, back during the Arab Spring, when it happened, during that particular time, Twitter was actually scheduled for a routine maintenance, which meant that it was going to be shut down for 24 hours. But that is when the Tahrir Square protests actually started, and Twitter indefinitely postponed its maintenance because it wanted to exploit that rift and make money out of it. So social media and chaos definitely is a problem, because the democratic system is not equipped to deal with this kind of a double conflict, where one conflict is on social media and it gets translated onto the real world. Democracy is not really equipped to deal with that, which is why it's a very big problem in the current scenario. Now we'll just quickly go over to the supremacy part. I think I'm running out of time, but I'll just quickly wrap up. So we spoke about supremacy here. We'll just quickly look at a few points in supremacy. Now, this is a very, very telling example. We have been seeing this, we have been observing this phenomenon for a very long time. The idea of somebody being superior and somebody being inferior has been going on since human civilization. It is a very natural human tendency, although it can be overcome. But what we see is that the people who were in power, let's say in the 17th and 18th century, in a way still continue to be in power today. And this is a very telling example of that particular phenomena. Now we'll just very quickly talk about supremacy with a few examples. Now we have often seen that as compared to other countries, the Asian and African countries get a very second grade treatment or a third grade treatment from tech companies. Now, the recent WhatsApp policy, which came out in the month of May, it was widely implemented across Asia and Africa. We had no choice in it. The only thing we could do was delete WhatsApp. But European users of WhatsApp actually had the choice to opt out of that particular policy, which again is something that is inconceivable, because why this kind of discrimination among users? Again, it points to the idea of supremacy. The second thing, where we'll just limit ourselves to the Indian context for now, that these tech companies display almost an East India company-like behavior. What I mean by this is that although Twitter and Facebook have Facebook India as a company, if we as users have some issues, we raise it to Facebook India. But Facebook India actually does not really take responsibility for it. It tells us to escalate it to their parent company, which is based in the US. So here again, we see the same East India behavior, where East India company made profits in India, made a lot of money in India. But if there was any problem, Indians had to speak directly to the crown to get their problem solved. So once again, it's a very imperialist way in which tech companies function. And the third one, which is also again very dangerous for democracy. Now, United States has a long history of toppling elected governments in third world countries, be it in South America, Central America, Africa, in a lot of countries. It is also, there is a very strong doubt that the tech companies may also be indulging in the same idea, where they are actually toppling elected governments in third world countries. The most recent example of that could be what happened in Nigeria, when the Nigerian president said that separatist violence will not be tolerated, and Nigeria is a sovereign country, and that is how it is going to be. That is when actually, just give me one moment. Yeah. So that is when actually Twitter banned the Nigerian president from Twitter. Now here, in a way, we believe, it seems like they are actually interested in toppling elected governments, not because, they don't agree with a particular regime, but I feel that it is simply for making money. As we spoke about conflict, if the government collapses, there is going to be conflict. People are going to vent out their anger, and these platforms are going to come in, swoop in on these people and make money out of them. So that is as far as the idea of supremacy goes. Now, just to give an example of how this supremacy works, this is a very telling example of that. Once again, how certain agenda is allowed in other countries, whereas when it comes to countries in the Middle East or China, where they have extremely stringent laws and extremely difficult punishments, tech companies readily comply with authoritarian states, but are always challenging and undermining democracy. So these are just a few things that point to the dangers of, let's say, the control of technical companies or technological companies as far as our democracy is concerned. Now I'll just leave you with a few questions. Now here we do not really have answers to these questions, but it certainly deserves thought from us. How to balance between keeping a check on social media and ensuring freedom of speech. Either we could do something like Nigeria and ban it altogether, but then what happens with freedom of speech? Secondly, we have seen how our identity has changed throughout the social media era. How will our identity change further with the rising power of social media? And lastly, the question of the hour, are tech companies and democracy fundamentally incompatible? And if that is the case, what is the solution for it? So that is just a few questions that I believe we can think about. And if any one of you is interested, this is just a few relevant readings that are that are easy to understand, and also give a lot of information about what we discussed today. So yes, so this is the relevant reading. And with that, I'll actually conclude. I hope I did not overstep the time limit here.
No, no.
Yeah, I'll just stop presenting. And I just want to say thank you once again to all of you for having patiently listened to this, 1 hour, or let's say probably more than 1 hour talk. And once again, I'm really grateful to the college and the mass communication department and you, Shiva, for giving me the
Right.
opportunity to actually think deeply about this and put forth my views and opinions before you all. So thank you once
Right.
again.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Avanti, for such an enlightening and instead of, apart from that, a lot of terms that we are actually getting to know. I mean, it's been like almost 3+ years that I taught a paper on new media and technologies back then when I worked with St. Joseph. I taught masters. Yeah, most of the works and the readings, like the social shaping of technology, how multiple identities keep moving, and or let's say online activism, slacktivism, and all. Lot of issues. Oh, we'll take open this platform for the students, and then
Yeah.
we'll see. Yeah. This is open for the students. Yeah, anyone can come up with questions. Yeah. No one. You guys, are you there?
Ma'am,
Yeah.
It's
ma'am,
nine. It was a 9:30 session, so yeah, I can't blame them. Yeah.
ma'am,
Yes.
ma'am, what is the point of having a view? It as it is going to be tampered in future, ma'am. It is going to
Uh,
be shaped and molded in their convenient form. So, what is the point of having a view on things, ma'am?
Yes, so when we think about it, it seems almost like a doomsday thing, but we should always have a view whether or not it gets shaped. At least we know that we have a view. That is something that we have to think about. And as I said, humanity has always faced problems, but we have emerged out of it. And if we actually look at the steps that certain governments across the world are taking to protect our views and our rights, then I think that we should have a view. It is a tough time, but nonetheless we are going to come out of it. We have a 5,000-year history to which attests that we will come out of it. So although I do not really have a very clear answer for this question, but I still feel that having your own view, your own opinion is important, and we should give more importance to our experiences than what 50 other people say. So I think that would, I know it's probably not the best answer, but this is something that I think we can do. And that's a very interesting question, by the way. It definitely deserves a lot of thinking.
Yes, students. Yeah, this session is open for the questions, and you can come up with any kind of question that pops up in your
Yeah.
brain. Okay, we'll give some more time. Or maybe I have a question, Navanti. Yeah. So I
Yeah, yeah.
was thinking about two important points when this is going on. One is um, the nexus between the existing governments and the big tech.
Yes.
Like I remember reading Karl Marx. What he says, whatever the new developmental tool that comes up is will be heavily exploited by the existing ruling governments before the benefits of it reaches to the common people or people in the lower ranks, right? So I was okay when the government is having a lot of control or big tech and the governments are working in coordination with doing these things, but at the same level, the new media technologies or all these online platforms, whatever we have, the kind of promise that it had made. Maybe if we can just
Mm.
take a look at what Zuckerberg had told, it's going to make
Yes.
world more democratic and all. But before the fruits of this democratic platform have reached the common public, to the disadvantaged or the marginalized communities before it reached to the rural areas. But the kind of a control that it is being is holding definitely comes to a big question. If this
Yes.
is I guess you got my point one, and
Yes.
the second one is what about the dissent? I was thinking about Arab Spring, which you also mentioned. It acted as the online movement acted like a precursor to the entire Arab Spring that had brought it up, right? So which spread
Yes.
to nearly 4 to 5 countries, and it dethroned some what do you call, very authoritative regimes like Hosni
Yes.
Mubarak and uh, now what's going to happen to the dissent if the governments are or the censorship, the Jammu and Kashmir issue that we have witnessed, which is still going on. So is there not going to be a space for the people to dissent against the kind of oppressive attitudes of the governments, and which are working in align with the big tech? Yeah,
Yes.
that's what I would give. Yeah.
Yes. As far as your first question is concerned, it is, I mean, obviously, we can overthrow the powerful, but not power itself. So anytime, somebody, one person falls, somebody is always going to come to power. As you said, that it promised a democratic system, but what we see is not that. And definitely governments are going to find whatever they can to control the people. So that is obviously going to be there. We see how Facebook or Twitter regularly receive requests from the government for more information. The point, however, here is that it's choosing between two evils, as I see it. uh, is that, one on one hand we have governments which obviously do not probably want to give us freedom of speech, but on the other hand we have tech. But in the case of, at least in democratic countries, we still have the option of, going to courts, protesting in the streets, or, actually throwing off the government in the next 5 years. Whereas if we think about tech, then we have none of these options but the same restrictions. So again, there is no specific answer to this. It's always going to be a question of somebody having power. Not everybody can have power. So as you said, and it's not going to reach the marginalized, because the ones who are at top definitely are going to take away the cream. So that is something that is going to continue, unfortunately. But as I said, we have to, persevere and, still work for it. And second point, as you said about dissent, as I mentioned, dissent is always good if it is, aimed against the wrong things. It's always a good practice. But however, my problem is with the intent of social media. They are not supporting dissent because they want to support dissent, but as I said, for conflict and money out of it. So as
Right.
I said, if they support dissent today, they may not support dissent tomorrow. So there is no guarantee that they will allow us to, dissent further. So I think, again, it doesn't really have a very organized structure right now, but uh, you know we see some bits and pieces of it happening around the world.
Right.
Or,
Right.
the
Yeah.
best example would be China. How social media does not the global media is not there in China, but it still supports everything China does. So I think
Right.
it's not very easy to label social media as against this, against that, but it's all
Right.
about profits, I think, because they, after
Right.
all, they are companies.
Right. I get it. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
There is one thing that's posted in the chat box. Someone is speaking about cancel culture, Ravanti. Um,
Yes. Yes.
yeah. If you can just
Yeah.
throw some light, that would be good, I guess.
Yes. So I think I had written about this in the EPW article as well, that the cancel culture, actually, if we think about it, it is nothing but just a manifestation of the, let's say, the elite ideology. And everybody who doesn't agree with it, to some extent, I wouldn't brand it entirely that way, but to some extent it is that. If you say that, oh, I am against veganism, or I believe in eating meat, it's only the people who have resources who can actually consume vegan food. Not everybody has that kind of a, let's say, uh, that kind of resources. The problem with cancel culture, once again, is that it's extremely authoritarian. The same problem that we had, it's almost feudalistic, that a group of nobles decide that this person should be hanged, and the person is hanged. The same thing happens in cancel culture. The other person's side is never heard. We just say that, oh, girl, you are cancelled, sister, you are cancelled, and so on. But the problem is the other person also in normal or liberal democracies should have a right to put forth their point of view, which doesn't happen in cancel culture. And it's just, continuance of the feudal form in a different way, as far as I see it. And yes, it has certainly gone too far, to the point where people are afraid to express anything for the fear that, oh, somebody will cancel me. I think it has definitely gone too far.
Oh, thank you. We have a question in the chat box. I see a discrepancy in the behavior of social media companies, particularly when they tout that they uphold equality, but then also go ahead and ban people who seem to be saying wrong things, quote unquote. Yeah. What are your thoughts? Wrong things in sense the person Shaunak is talking about. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah. So, as I said, oftentimes the reason we see this discrepancy is because we look at the social media platform and we look at the company as one thing. But the fact is that they are two different things, or rather, we should look at them as two different things. The platform, they genuinely want to be liberal. They want to, embrace progressive values. They want to support small businesses, support marginalized communities, and so on. But at the end of the day, the platform is just the front. The one who is running all of it is the company. And because it's a company, it has profits to make, it has money to earn, it has revenues to earn. There are investors who are involved. So after all, it's a game of money for the company. So whatever is beneficial for the company in terms of profit will be done, whether or not it supports their platform values. The best example of this would be Apple. You know how Ricky Gervais actually blasted them in the award ceremony, where Apple talks about dignity and equality and equal pay for equal work in United States and in Europe, but it actually runs sweatshop factories in China and India, because that is Apple as a company working, whereas here it's Apple as a platform talking about it. So I think we have to separate the two, then we won't really see the discrepancy. And we also need to remember that the platform is run by the company and it's not the other way around. So profits are always going to be the first priority for them. I
Right,
think that
right.
would be my answer for that.
Any more questions? Anyone in the class has got, guys? Oh, okay. Then in that case, we will wrap it up, Avanti. I just Tejaswini, are you there? Tejaswini,
Yes, sir.
can you hear me? Tejaswini, yeah. Okay, over to you, Tejaswini. She will just give up.
Sir, there is a question in chat box, sir.
Okay, okay. Hold a second, Tejaswini. Yeah. Thanks, Shiva, for reminding. Yeah, for yeah, ma'am. What are your thoughts on PDP, Personal Data Protection Bill by government?
Yes, so I wish I could answer this question, but I haven't really, read much about it or gone through the bill to be able to comment on it. So, as of now, I don't really know much about it. So, yeah.
Any more, guys? Okay, Tejaswini, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Good morning, everyone. I'm Tejaswini, student of Bhavans Vivekananda College of Humanities, Sciences and Commerce, pursuing BA. It's my honor to give vote of thanks to all those who made this webinar successful. I would like to thank Bhavans Vivekananda College, Shivatrishul sir, and Ramnarayan College, Shivatrishul sir, and Ms. Avanti Lele for organizing this webinar, Ms. Adviti Mishra for the poster, and every person who participated for this in this enlightening webinar. The topic social media, democracy, and identity is what I believe to be very important for everyone to think on and know in the present world. We got to know a lot of new things through this event today, and learning about anonymity and identity made me ponder about AI. And I think I speak for all when I say I relate to how social media consume our time. Now we all have to question again whether we are controlling media or is it the other way around. I would really like
Right.
to thank I would really like to talk on a lot of points, but I'll stop here. Thank you, ma'am, for relevant reading suggestions and your clear explanation. Thank you, everyone, for your questions and taking time to be here. Have a great day ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Tejaswini. Thanks again, Avanti, and
Yes,
the whole
I
village of,
yes.
yeah.
Thank you to you and thank you to all of you. All of you.
Right.
Coming here and attending.
We look
Thank
forward for future collaborations in case if you would go ahead with teaching, coming up with any papers on social media that if we can do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, and thank you once again. And also, the very first mail that you sent itself was so encouraging. So definitely a big kudos to you as well.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, guys. Yeah, we will call it a day. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Bye, Shiva. Bye, Shiva.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Bye.